Good afternoon and welcome to Fashion Declares. We're delighted to have you join us. Thank you so much for making the time on this cooling down afternoon. We've got a very exciting 45 minutes for you. We hope that we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have on the Fashion Declares community. So thank you so very much for joining us. My name is Safia Minney and I'm founder of People Tree and also Fashion Declares. Thank you so much. It's exciting to see we've got Roshan joining from Belfast. We've got Kimberly who's joining from Florence in Italy. Rather jealous of you, I must say. Great. Matthew's joining from Portsmouth, University of Portsmouth. Thank you so much. We've got Arabella joining from very sunny St Leonard's on Sea, Lydia from Sweden, and then in London, but from Canada, we've got Catherine, who's joining from Sustainability Practices at Kingston Uni, and someone joining from Pittsburgh. Fantastic. Really delighted that you've made time to join us at this time. Not an easy time for you. And then we've got Alana from Kent. Great. Lovely. We've got Adam from Exeter. Fabulous. Sustainability lead at RAFA. Fantastic. Great. Well, we'd love to make a start. You're very, very welcome. It's really nice to see your faces. So if you don't mind switching your cameras on, that would be lovely. That we've designed the program today, so we'll have some time to have a Q&A and answer any questions that you might have. So the Fashion Declares movement, it's a grassroots movement. It's a bottom-up movement for people within the fashion industry who really feel a passion and a deep commitment to tackle the climate, ecological and social emergency. We started Fashion Declares about 6 months ago. Really this is, we're very much a platform, a community for all actors within the fashion industry, not just brands, but also suppliers and NGOs and campaign organizations that are also supporting the fashion industry's transition to becoming sustainable. So we have about 550 individuals from organizations, large and small fashion organizations, and also from many of those NGOs and campaign and expert support organizations. So you'll find a list online, but please do have a look at the community. And we're very much hoping that you'll feel excited about the kind of support that Fashion Declares can give you to strengthen your journey in sustainability. So here are the advisors of Fashion Declares, and we're really lucky to be joined today by Mike Barry, people within the fashion industry in different organizations, some of which I'm sure you'll see and recognize. So we published an open letter which was signed by about 300 people, key movers and shakers within the fashion industry, within as little as a month. We are speaking out for 5 goals. So speaking out for urgent action. So asking fashion leaders to galvanize a true industry-wide debate on the climate, ecological and social emergency, because we don't believe that voluntary agreements are enough, that we need mandatory agreements that will also hold businesses accountable regionally, nationally and internationally, that we need to radically decarbonize, not by 2050, but by 2030. We need to restore ecosystems and we need to build back the biodiversity that we're really fragmenting. We're dangerously at a place of losing. That we need to promote social justice and a just transition, and also radical transparency and corporate governance, and build and share best practice to build a truly regenerative fashion model. So you can see all of this on the Fashion Declares website. Please do have a look. We've been running webinars. We have tools on the website that speak to each of these goals to really demystify them for you, to give you the kinds of top level understanding so that you can drive the conversation within your organization. You'll be able to ask questions, but you'll also be able to lead the action within any of these areas of specialism. So I think for me, certainly starting in sustainable fashion 30 years ago, when I launched People Tree, already at that point, the climate emergency, climate change, as we were calling it then, was a strong topic, and that's why I wanted to do everything in organic cotton and set up the first organic supply chain. The animation you can see in front of you is showing how in the last 200 years, from industrialization on, just how much the planet has warmed. And it's shocking to see this. I mean, of course, yes, it's all around us now. And, you know, it's only perhaps relatively recently, as we start experiencing these extreme weather events in Europe, that we understand just how incredibly fragile and how huge the impact is in the global south. So you'll have noticed that we've had many COPs, and yet we are still on this trajectory to 2.83 degrees, and that the London Stock Exchange is still planning for 4 degrees or more. We can see also that with these extreme weather patterns, if you read, for example, the Human Climate Niche report, it says that by 2070, that the extreme weather conditions will make increasingly land uninhabitable, further undermine biodiversity, and lead to huge food and water security, such that more than 3 billion people, a third of the population, will have to move because they have no livelihoods, they have no food and water to sustain their lives. So the experience also of climate breakdown is deeply unfairly distributed. So we in the global north are responsible for more than 80%, 90% actually, of the climate catastrophe, and yet the brunt is being borne by people in the global south. So 88% of the world's population are living in the global south, and they account only for 8% of climate breakdown. And if we talk about the fashion industry, of course, this is not just the offices and the delivery, it's what we call scope 3, it's the supply chains that make the products, the fossil fuels that are producing as much as 2/3 of the fabrics that we currently produce, and all of the energy that is used to run those factories and to dye clothes and distribute them, but also the 70 million workers in the supply chain that are reliant on, be they small, incomes from fashion. So we have to find a way through a just transition. So we don't really need to reiterate in this incredible heat just how important it is that we do work to rapidly decarbonize, but also to push through different ways of implementing a living income for people and radically change the industry so that we put people and planet first. We know that we have the money, we have the ingenuity, we have the solutions. The only thing that we're missing is the political will. We need a massive, massive shift. Fortunately, consumers, employees, increasingly investors, even government officials are beginning to realize that we have to change everything that we do. So this is a time now to really lean in to finding those solutions and developing those within your organizations. So you might want to have a look at Project Drawdown. This gives you a much broader view. I mean, we're talking here about the fashion sector today, with Fashion Declares, but obviously that there are huge amounts of resources out there on real sustainability, for example. You'll also find resources, but cutting food waste, renewable, the urgent transition needed for renewable energy, but also some of those other issues that impact people more so in the global south. So I'd like to introduce now a great friend of mine, Mike Barry. And when I was writing Regenerative Fashion, Mike and I had a number of different conversations. I think we were both feeling anxious that too little was happening and it was just too incredibly slow. But Mike, I would really love you to talk a little bit about why you joined and decided that you wanted to become an advisor with Fashion Declares, and your personal journey. How have you come from from doing some really revolutionary stuff at M&S? How are you holding the climate and ecological and social crisis today? Why do we all need to be part of the solution?
Safia, thank you. And delighted to join so many of you on this call. And it doesn't remind me that my advanced years, I'm twice the age of most people on this call. You're the future, not me. But let me just share some sort of experience and learning so I can pass the baton to you new leaders. And when I joined Marks & Spencer, the UK retailer, in 2000, it was so important in the marketplace then that employing somebody like me was a rarity. And even within M&S, that became a world leader on this, I had no line manager, no budget for the first 4 years of my work there. It was sink or swim, form alliances, find friends, and then sort of drive it to the top of the business. And ultimately, M&S launched a very ambitious plan A because there's no plan B for the planet we've got. And, you know, I got grey hair for trying to hold things together, trying to get the business to launch an ambitious plan, developing that plan, but crucially implementing that plan. Because there are too many words on paper in our world. And getting in the trenches and getting the change done is what defines the next decade. You know, not more press releases, not more ambition, get things done. So where do I think we are today? You know, in the last 6 months, we've seen extreme weather events across the world. You know, yesterday it was about the UK, and it's the first time it's been over 40 degrees and wildfires in the UK. But in Australia, dreadful floods. In China, extreme heat. In India, Pakistan, Iran, almost unlivable temperatures above 50 degrees C. The USA, the west of the US, in the middle of a 1,200-year worst mega drought. You know, we're being torn apart at 1 degree of heating. And Safia just said we're probably heading for at least 3 degrees C. And I say at least 3 degrees because achieving 2 degrees, I think we're past now, because it demands absolute global alignment. And where is global politics now? The US, Europe, Russia, Middle East, China, no one's getting it. No one's going to align and do this for us. We have to step forward and galvanize a revolution across not just the marketplace, but society through how we interact with people when they work for us, when they buy with us, when they invest in us. So to put that 1 degree of heating in context, that's unleashed terrible extreme weather events now. The world was on average once 5 degrees colder. 23,000 years ago, it was the Ice Age. And much of Northern Europe, the north of North America, was under 1,000 meters of ice. That's 5 degrees colder on average. So when we talk about 3 degrees hotter, understand that's cataclysmic, because the population of the world 23,000 years ago was 130,000 people. The population of a small city in the UK like Norwich, in the east of the UK. Today it's 8 billion and heading for 9 billion. So if we unleash 3 degrees of heating, it's going to be cataclysmic, not just for lives, societal order, but also for the economy as well. So what do we do about it? Well, I grew up in an era where it was about making your existing business model less bad. You know, you try to sell things, you try to make sure the factories and the fibers were 5%, 10% less bad than they might have been if you hadn't intervened. And that was hard work to say. I've got grey hair for a reason. But all the time, every step forward we took to make things less bad was swamped by rising consumption. Rising consumption because there's more people on the planet, rising consumption because in some ways, through human progress, good news, the people of China, of India can start to access what we take for granted in the West. And this is not about drawing up the drawbridge on what we take for granted, because we want people to live better lives. But it's about questioning how we consume in the West and the leadership we're providing there. So I believe we're at the point of inflection now, where less bad is not good enough. And we're starting to see 2 great industrial sectors on the planet torn apart by sustainability forces. The first is power, the shift from gas, oil, to the shift to wind and solar. Complex, as we see now with the war in Ukraine and the implications for energy prices around the world, but also inevitable. The same with the car sector. So 7 years ago, I sat at the black tie dinner with the leadership team of one of the world's biggest car companies. I talked to them about Tesla and they laughed. Tesla would never overtake them, usurp their 20th century power in the internal combustion engine. In the 5 years after that conversation, Tesla went from being worth 50 billion US to $1 trillion, because Tesla saw the future and this other car company didn't. And now it's scrabbling to survive as the paradigm shift happens in that sector. The third sector to be disrupted in this way is foods, the most polluting industrial sector on the planet. 34% of all greenhouse gas emissions, most of the water used on the planet, deforestation, and crazily, 40% of all calories produced on the planet never reach the human mouth. 1 billion people go to bed every night starving. Insanity. But our sector, the fashion sector, is the next. This constant desire to flog more cheap, nasty stuff to be worn once Instagram and thrown away has to be disrupted, and it is being disrupted. Again, we see the rise of the resale platforms, the rise of the charity sector, which is only going to be accelerated by the shift, by the cost of pressure, living prices that we have today. So all around us, the challenge to consuming clothing as we know it today is emerging. Do we need to buy it in the first place? Can we buy it secondhand? Can we repair it? Can we rent it? Can we at least buy new, making fundamentally better raw materials? That's where we stand. So let me finish by where I started, which is a reach out to you, the audience, a new crop of leaders coming through. I want you to be passionate about bending the arc on the world that we're heading into now. I can't be clear about that. But I want you to do it with a smile on your face, to be positive and to reach out to people to satisfy their needs for the future, and not just say it's all about not, you can't have it, you can't do it, it's all about hair shirt. It's not. We need to excite people about this new way of consuming in the future. So Safia, back to you. I'm delighted to be an advisor on this. And what matters to me is building a community of change, people as old as me, people as young as you, but together we're stronger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. We're going to have a Q&A session after we've heard from Lavinia. So please, if you want to pop your questions into the chat box for Mike, that would be great. Give him a bit of a heads up also to see how he'd like to answer them. You know, this is a conversation. You know, we're really keen to hear more from you. So thank you so much, Mike, for setting the context. Lavinia worked for Armed Angels, and a brand that I admire a great deal in Germany, doing some really exciting work, and joined the Fashion Declares community earlier on this year and has been helping us in a number of different ways to share her expertise. So Lavinia, I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about your personal journey, and also how can the Fashion Declares community support other people like yourself who are on this journey, trying to make the biggest difference that they possibly can in as short a time as they possibly can, or you know, they'll perhaps just go out and leave fashion altogether. You know, they'll start a restaurant, or they'll go into organic farming, perhaps for local food, or work for social enterprise. But you know, why are you choosing to stay in fashion, but also what is that passion that brings you to want to share your knowledge and best practice within the community?
All right, thank you so much, Safia. And it's also an honor for me to talk to you today and advocating for a just fashion industry. Yeah, how did I end up here advocating? Because I'm not a fashionista, and I actually tried to quit the industry since a couple of years, but here I am again, still. So basically, I think I was very lucky as a young girl and a woman to have lived in a couple of countries in the global south, in unstable economies, where I was able to pretty early question my own white saviorism, and to observe how I'm just taking a course on decolonial sustainability, and I just learned last week that it's not, it's better to say the global majority and not the global south, because we are talking about the global majority, most of the people on this planet. How and why the global majority lives under such harsh conditions. And then I studied business administration, so I'm a business economist. And I was basically left with a lot of question marks during my studies at university. Because like business administration and economics actually, you know, comes from social sciences. But what I learned in university was like focused 100% on economies of scale, growth, and profits. And I was totally missing out social and environmental and ethical questions and justice. And then after university, I started working at a consultancy, and they were specialized in the implementation of social and ecological standard requirements in producing industry. So I basically started in food, then I did some electronics, and I ended up in fashion. And I started in the social sector, and I ended up doing ZDHC and wastewater audits in China, Bangladesh, and India. So I'm one of these all-rounders. I'm no expert in no field, but I've got a pretty, you know, a good overview of the industry. And why I'm working or still working in the fashion industry is, well, first of all, I think I have gained some experience, but I also take the fashion industry as an example for misled management in global supply chains. But I also and still believe that the industry has the power, because it's such an emotional industry and it's such an emotional product, seems to be for other people, not for me, to eventually be a game changer. And I joined, or I do support Fashion Declares, because unfortunately there's no other initiative in our industry which is actually claiming for restoration and reparation, what we have to do in this urgent situation of our world. And on the other hand, I also see a big focus on climate issues, which is also, well, which is very important. We definitely, I mean, we've been too productive over the last years, but it's not enough. I do think it's not enough to slow down. We radically need to reduce production and CO2 emissions. Not only CO2 emissions, we radically need to slow down and reduce the amounts of clothing we are producing worldwide. And therefore, I do believe that it's not about a conscious or a mind shift. It's much more. It's about a cultural and a system shift. That's what we need. And for everyone who works in the field or wishes to start advocating or working in the field, I know there's a big focus on CO2 emissions, as I said before, which is important, but we also and still need a lot of people focusing on the actual basics. And I'm talking about social justice requirements. I'm talking about wages. There's no garment in the world and no brand which can actually guarantee that in the whole supply chain, a so-called living wage has been paid. It doesn't exist until today. We need to talk about working hours. We need to talk about social security. We need to talk about safe workplaces. We need to talk about anti-discrimination, gender-based violence, and so on and so forth. So everybody who feels a little overwhelmed by the strong climate targets, we also need people driving change when it comes to human rights in our supply chains. Yeah, I could keep on talking, but I think that's basically it about myself and what I wish for the industry and the new leaders.
Thank you so much, Lavinia. So yeah, I think we've got some really powerful thoughts, very, very provocative discussion. I was at a climate conference with the City of London on Monday with KPMG and Schroders. We are finally moving into a place where the finance and investor community will talk about, we say ESG, environment, social and governance, but even in Davos, where I was in May, there was little discussion about the S, the social, but finally S is becoming a really, really key topic. And fashion is all about the workers. It's about those 70 million workers. It's about the farmers. It's about celebrating farmers as stewards of the land, the very people who will be responsible for promoting the resilience, the climate resilience of our soils, and the rebuilding and restoration of our ecosystems. So yes, thank you so much for really, Lavinia, giving us the S to think so much more urgently about. I'd very much like to ask if there are some questions. Otherwise, Mike, I wonder whether you might have some questions that you might like, or some comments that you might like to make on what your hopes are for the Fashion Declares community. It is quite difficult actually to be brave and to be radical and to kind of stand out at the front and start to talk about how we redesign the fashion industry to sit within planetary boundaries when we've overshot 4 of the 9 in terms of climate change and biodiversity and land use and phosphorus. So very, very difficult, isn't it? But as Lavinia said, there's kind of opportunity with fashion communications to really create that cultural shift. And in fact, at 5 o'clock we have a webinar starting on fashion communications for the 1.5 degree lifestyle, which yes, of course we know is largely impossible at this stage. We're looking more at 2 degrees, but the cultural power of the fashion industry. Yes, I'm wondering, Mike, how do you manage to stand out and to continue to be really quite provocative and talk to fashion leaders about the things that they really don't want to necessarily talk about? We don't talk about degrowth, we talk about redesigning the fashion industry to sit within planetary boundaries, but we are talking about reducing the 30 some items that we buy each year new to maybe 2 or 3, and to substitute that maybe with secondhand or repairing, or something that's a lovely hand woven or upcycled piece. But of course we need new business models to be able to make that happen, and we don't have legislation for a level playing field either. How do we create that, or begin to look at that cultural shift?
So Safia, let me make just 3 very brief points, and then lots for the people coming on this. First, Lavinia, brilliant. I abbreviated all the ills of the fashion industry down around carbon. You were absolutely right to correct on that human dimension. And frankly, I see way too many corporate sustainability plans and carbon plans that utterly forget the S. And I would only draw people's attention to one practical example of a good practice I see, and that's the consumer goods business Reckitt, which have got a really good global decarbonisation plan. But they also operate in a small British town in the north of England called Hull, which used to be a fishing port. It's fallen in hard times. And Reckitt have got a big factory there and a big R&D base. And they've committed to help Hull become net zero by bringing people, communities, sports clubs, hospitals, SMEs in Hull together to co-create that future for them. It's democratic, it's human, they work together. So Lavinia, thank you for bringing the human dimension into it. That was absolutely critical. The second thing I would just say, why I'm working with Fashion Declares is we don't need more of me in so many ways, not just the diversity issue, but just background. I'm an expert, I'm a technical expert in this area. I want to see marketeers, I want to see retailers, I want to see logistics people, I want to see product developers doing sustainability as part of their day job. And that's what Fashion Declares is, bringing this much wider community of action together. So sustainability is part of everybody's job. That's the second thing. And the final thing is, how do we get this paradigm shift to degrowth, a totally different approach to consumption? I've grown up in this big fashion world, and it's really hard, isn't it? Because every year people are struggling to keep their heads above water. And, you've got a Ukraine crisis, a cost of living crisis, we've had a pandemic, lots of reasons to say, let's wait for another year of that. But two forces now crunching on the fashion sector. One is, again, those extreme weather events I talked about around the world that said we just can't go on as we are. And the second is the basic economic disruption. This is no longer just about a reputational risk to your business. The Guardian exposes you for one day, it's awful, then the world moves on and you carry on. If you're on the wrong side of this disruption, you're a traditional car company dying. If you're on the right side of it, you're the Tesla of fashion, you win in the future with a new fundamental product and service. And that concentrates minds in boardrooms. And I still see too many dinosaurs who look like me at least, who don't get that. But actually, the next 5 years, an awful lot of big, traditional, ignorant fast fashion businesses will die because they're not ready for this change. Enough from me. Lavinia, please come in and add to that.
Yeah, as I stated before, I think until today, there's no other initiative calling for restoration and reparation. What I do believe is what we need to do. And I can even tell you like a little anecdote. Last November, I was at Textile Exchange Conference in Ireland, and I was participating in a panel on biodiversity and I don't know what. And there were people from like, people who are supposed to be my role models from like those brands, those brands over there when it comes to sustainability initiatives and sustainability action. And I sat there and I couldn't believe what they were telling us, because they were like, yeah, eventually we need to be really provocative and radical, and eventually we brands need to buy back or give back land and restore land. And I was like, I can't believe that you're actually saying this. You're a brand operating on the market since 40 years and violating human rights since 30, 40 years, extracting unsustainable raw materials since 30, 40 years. And you're telling me now that eventually you need to restore and make this part of your business model? Of course. I mean, of course, because otherwise we do not get out of this together. Well, this is one point, reparation and restoration. Nobody's actually calling for it. I do hope that in the near future, this is going to be somehow mandatory in some other standards, certification systems, whatever. But over there, politics need to come in again. And then I think the Fashion Declares initiative is also one of the very few accelerators when it comes to community building. I mean, all the webinars and all the information we receive and all the opportunities where we can exchange ideas and so on and so forth. And I do believe that community building and community engagement is also one of the tools which will bring this complex and diverse but very separated industry, from raw material origin to the final product, and eventually also to the consumer, because now in Europe we're talking about an extended producer and consumer responsibility together. Because I mean, over here there's people from the industry, but there's eventually also people who are just interested in the topic, right? And we're sitting here all together and talking about these very important topics.
Thank you so much, Lavinia. I'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. So where or what is the conversation around the role of textile production starts at the beginning of the supply chain design process? If there is a better raw material production manufacturing, what kind of impacts could be made? Thanks, Kimberly. That's a really great question. In terms of textile production, we ran a webinar called Low Impact Materials, Biodiversity and Regenerative Farming, which is on YouTube, which I think really covers the topic very, very thoroughly, and also signposts some great best practice and some initiatives that can certainly help in that process. We also have a circular economy webinar, which is coming up on I think it's September the 7th. Yeah, so we have the circular economy webinar, which will be running on Wednesday the 7th of September. So please do go on online and register for that on Eventbrite. So that I think will also be very helpful. And then we'll be looking at business models in the October the 5th webinar, which is on governance, transparency and accountability. So hopefully that will also be useful to many of you. Please do sign up to Fashion Declares if you're part of the community. If you're on our email list, you'll get lots of invitations to join webinars and events as and when we run them, and you'll receive a regular newsletter. There's also the Patreon, which you could join up to, which helps to sustain us. We're a CIC, a community interest company under Real Sustainability, so it's really important that that we get funding, but we're largely on a volunteer group at the moment. Lavinia, please come in.
Yes, thank you so much. Can I say something regarding the question of the role of textile production and starting at the supply chain design?
Please.
I don't know, but there's this argument flying around in our industry that 80% of the impact is generated in the design phase. I've actually never found the source. What I see in the industry is when designing a garment sustainably, that it's only focused on low impact materials, which is obviously very important. But over here again, please widen, your reach and do things sustainability more inclusively and more diverse, because it's not enough to use low impact materials. I do think that especially in the design phase, you can integrate certain inclusivity and diversity aspects and criteria. I do believe that cooperating and checking in your supply chain how production planning is done has a very big impact. I do believe that, for example, checking how far one design can be uptaken into the next seasons, eventually in other colors, and creating so-called never out of stock articles. So the whole supply chain, you can create and establish a traceable, robust supply chain for one specific product group. And I think then the impact is even greater if you only focus on low impact materials.
Yes, certainly. And of course, the Better Buying Institute has talked about how the relationship between buyer and supplier is so key, not only in terms of price, but also in terms of lead time.
Exactly.
And the huge impact that can have on forcing people into overtime, and also not giving the security of contracts and work. And certainly from my background in craft, with a longer critical path, by using traditional skills like hand weaving, hand knitting, hand dyeing, and printing techniques, just how many livelihoods can be produced in making one garment. And that might well be part of that calculation when we look at reducing how much we buy new, would be to increase the labor component of the products that we buy. So I'm interested also to see, we have a couple of questions here also. So in terms of business models, please join the circular economy, because certainly we'll be talking about some startups there that are helping with the circular economy. I think you'll enjoy that.
Can I just respond to Kimberly's question there about
Please.
Engaging citizens and their consumption choices? So for the last 20 years, business has stepped away from any form of conversation with people about their consumption habits. It's been just push it at them. There's been obviously some good stuff done by B Corp, eco-labeling, organic labelling, fair trade, good, but it's small. What's happening in the adjacent food world of food at the moment is really interesting. All across Europe, there is a series of trials running, both driven by the policy system and voluntary private systems, to start to put front of pack labels on products to tell you the story behind your product. Now, it's very environmentally focused. To the social discussion we've just had, we need to broaden it as well. But even more interesting, a series of new digital tools are emerging, so you don't have to look at a complex label on every product you're possibly going to buy in a shop or online. Digital tools allow you to put your preferences in. So, for example, on food, palm oil's in thousands of different products, but you can now specify, or will be in the near future, I don't want products put in front of me online, they've got palm oil in them. You don't have to look for labels, you don't have to do the searching, it's just made simple for you. So that world in food will move across to fashion quite quickly, and will start to engage people, first in terms of the impact of the individual choices to make, and then that much bigger conversation about, do you actually need this? Should you be consuming it at all? Can you buy it secondhand, for example, if you do need it?
Thank you, Mike, for answering that question. Please do join the Fashion Communications Building a New Narrative webinar that's going to be starting at 5 o'clock if you have time, because many of the questions and a lot of the discussion that has been coming up is about, you know, changing that mindset, the culture, the behavior, which we are so much part of. So that will be, I think, very informative too. I'd just like to thank Mike and Lavinia and all of you for joining this webinar on what is still quite a warm evening here in London area. And please do sign up to become part of the Fashion Declares movement. There's something for absolutely everyone. Please don't be shy to ask any questions that you might have. You'll find us on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn, and please do invite your friends and peers that are in the fashion industry to join us too. So thank you so very, very much, and a special thank you to Mike and Lavinia and Millie, who've helped to bring this webinar together. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a nice evening. Take care.